I don't want to set the world on fire.
War. War never changes.
This simple yet eloquent phrase is the perfect encapsulation of the world of the Fallout franchise. No matter how far humanity may progress, we are always doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. Today, Fallout is one of gaming's most popular franchises, with millions of fans from across the globe. However, there was a time when the series seemed to be doomed to be little more than a memory to a small but loyal community of fans. That was until Fallout 3. Released in 2008 by Bethesda Softworks, Fallout 3 was both a critical and commercial success, winning multiple Game of the Year awards and selling over 12 million copies worldwide. To many gamers, Fallout 3 was their introduction to the franchise, with few having heard of, let alone playing the original two games released in the late 1990s. In the mid to late 2000s, console role-playing games were considered to be a niche genre by many players. While 2006's The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion went a long way into changing many gamers' opinions, Fallout 3 was the game that brought RPGs to blockbuster levels. With a wide-open sandbox world coupled with the retro-futuristic, post-apocalyptic setting being one of the game's major selling points. The game allowed the player to freely explore the capital wasteland formerly known as Washington DC. With dozens of quests to complete and unique locations to explore, Fallout 3 provided hundreds of hours of gameplay. While Fallout 3 is deserving of much of the praise it received, the game does have several glaring issues, from its story to design to gameplay. In the years following Fallout 3's release, fans of the original Fallout games have become more and more vocal about Bethesda's title, claiming that it does not have the same freedom of the original games, and that Bethesda's Fallout is largely an empty experience compared to the other releases in the series. While this is certainly a point of view that has some merit, I do personally believe that Fallout 3 is a fantastic game. However, as I will cover in this video, there are more than a handful of glaring issues that prevent the game from being the masterpiece it should have been. These issues are what make Fallout 3 perfectly imperfect. Called Interplay back in the mid-1990s, with programmer Tim Kaine being credited as the creator of the series. Fallout, a post-nuclear role-playing game, was released in 1997, and was a critical success with raving reviews from both critics and gamers at the time. An isometric turn-based role-playing game, the gameplay is almost unrecognisable compared to the more modern additions to the series. The game contained a retro-futuristic 1950s tone, with a post-apocalyptic setting based 84 years after a global nuclear war. It combined its bleak, hostile world with a good dose of well-timed dark humour, something that future games would try to emulate. While not a smash hit, the game was successful enough to get a sequel. Fallout 2 was released a year later in 1998, again receiving positive feedback, with many fans pleased at how it improved on many features without removing the gritty tone and immersive world of the first game. However, while these games were successful, they were never able to reach the financial heights of other popular franchises at the time. This was likely due to a lack of a console release for both games, and the role-playing genre not being as popular with casual gamers. As a result, Interplay would start going through severe financial difficulties as they struggled to combat increasing competition in the gaming market. The following years would see console spin-offs Fallout Tactics and Fallout Brotherhood of Steel being released, while subsidiary studio Black Isle were developing the third mainline release in the series. The original Fallout 3, codenamed Van Buren, was reportedly in a playable state in 2003, with several improvements to the gameplay, including 3D graphics and real-time combat. However, due to Interplay's continuing financial struggles, the project would be scrapped in 2003, as the company would fall into bankruptcy. The rights to the franchise would be sold to Bethesda Softworks in 2004. The studio famous for creating the Elder Scrolls series would now be tasked with reviving the post-apocalyptic franchise. Bethesda had decided early on that they wanted their Fallout to be built upon the same mechanics that they had used in their previous title, The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. This would mean that for the first time, a Fallout game would be presented in a first-person perspective 3D world. This would present a challenge for Bethesda, as they would need to design a first-person shooter from the ground up, with a team that had very little experience in the genre. This led to the gunplay in Fallout 3 being an experience. With no option to aim down sights, coupled with enemy hitboxes having the consistency of Half-Life releases, Fallout 3's combat was extremely weak, especially compared to some of the other shooters at the time. In order to counter this, Bethesda introduced a feature based on a mechanic from the original Fallout games, known as VATS. VATS allowed the player to pause time and select which enemy to target and where on their body to target them. This was a unique and fun addition to gameplay, but was criticised by many for making the game too easy. However, Bethesda's main strength in all their games is their ability to build a world that the player can get lost in. Both figuratively, and in the case of the DC Metro, bloody literally! The desolate empty wasteland expands all the way to the horizon. The twisting collapsed remains of the once mighty American Empire is the only recognisable feature to the player, and the constant green hue gives the map its eerie atmosphere. While the graphics and textures of Fallout 3 haven't aged well, the design of the map coupled with the immersive soundtrack still allow the player to become completely consumed by the wasteland. It cannot be denied that Bethesda brought their A-game when designing the map of Fallout 3.
Wake up, Wasteland! It's me, 3Dog, bringing you all the music and news your little hearts can handle.
One of the new features that Bethesda brought to the series was the addition of radio stations. These stations would allow players to listen to music from the 1940s and 50s. This would help immerse the player further into the retro-futuristic setting of Fallout. The often upbeat and cheerful soundtrack would be polar opposite to the brutal scenes occurring on screen. This soundtrack dissonance serves to create a sense of tragic apathy and is a common technique used in film, most famously in the conclusion of Stanley Kubrick's 1964 film Dr. Strangelove. When designing Fallout 3, Bethesda tried to import as much of the lore and themes from the previous games as they could. Fallout as a series has always taken inspiration from films and popular culture. From the post-apocalyptic themes and costume design of Mad Max to the retro-futurism and dystopian setting of Metropolis. Fallout 3's opening also harkens back to the original games, with an introduction by Ron Perlman.
War. War never changes. Since the dawn of humankind, when our ancestors first discovered the killing power of rock and bone, blood has been spilled in the name of everything from God to justice to simple psychotic rage.
This introduction was extremely engaging for new fans of the series, as it immediately set the tone Bethesda wanted the game to have, while also giving a brief description of the world the game is set in.
The destructive nature of man could sustain itself no longer. The world was plunged into an abyss of nuclear fire and radiation.
The introduction also introduces the player to the Vaults. In the Fallout universe, the Vaults were massive bomb shelters created by Vault-Tec to house the American population in the event of a nuclear war, including the player's Vault, Vault 101.
When fire rained from the sky, the giant steel door of Vault 101 slid closed and never reopened. It was here you were born. It is here you will die. Because in Vault 101, no one ever enters, and no one ever leaves.
See that? It was your mother's favorite passage. It's from the Bible, Revelation 21:6. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely.
Fallout 3 begins with your birth. As the white slowly fades and you take your first breath, you see your dad, James, who is played by Liam Neeson.
We'll find you. And I will keep...
You choose your gender, name and appearance before your mother goes into cardiac arrest.
You're just...
James?
Catherine?
James?
Catherine! She's in cardiac arrest. Start compressions.
James.
Get the baby out of here. Move! Move! 1,000. 1,000. Come on. Hang on, Catherine. Hang on.
The following sequences involve the player growing up in Vault 101, from being an escape artist infant to a 10-year-old.
Stanley, you turned the lights on too fast. You blinded the poor kid. Happy birthday.
To a troublesome teenager. These sequences act as a tutorial for the player, as it introduces some of the key mechanics of the game, such as conversations, shooting mechanics, and skill checks. It also shows the player the almost cult-like society of the Vault, where the Vault's overseer has complete authority over the residents. The final sequence has you being woken up by your childhood friend Amada, telling you that your dad has escaped the Vault, something that you were led to believe was impossible. Amada also informs you that her father, the Vault Overseer, has ordered his guards to find you and to shoot you on sight, forcing you to have to flee the Vault as well. In order to escape the Vault, the player must find the code to the Overseer's terminal in order to unlock a secret passage that leads to the Vault's entrance. As the player moves through the Vault, they can choose whether to engage the Vault's security, or to evade them as they make their way to the Overseer's office. In the Overseer's office, we can see one of the early examples in the game of there being multiple ways to fulfill a task. You can confront the Overseer and threaten him to give you the password, you can kill him and take it off his corpse, or you can sneak past him and avoid the conflict altogether. While simplistic, this section is meant to further highlight to the player that there may be more than one way to complete a task in the game. Once you've made it to the Vault entrance, you say one last goodbye to Amada. You leave Vault 101, the only home you've ever known, never to return. You have become the Lone Wanderer. This lengthy opening has divided much of the player base, with many arguing that it's too restrictive and, for lack of a better term, boring. Looking at it objectively, it is strange how a game that allows you to go anywhere and do anything starts off by locking the player in a vault for the first half an hour of the game. This certainly is true for returning players who have already experienced the Wasteland several times over. However, for new players, I do think that this introduction is important, as it makes the moment when they leave the vault so much more impactful. To be thrown out of the comfort and safety into the harsh wasteland is a feeling that few other games have been able to replicate. One of the best justifications of the game's opening comes from the director of Fallout 3, Todd Howard.
Merging into the world, and there was an initial idea. I'm usually designing like the very beginning of a game. Like, okay, it's like this, you live your whole life in the vault. And that snapshot of your life as you go through it, and then the emerging. I love the beginning of Fallout 3.
Right.
And if you go back, if you played it a bunch, it's a little bit like, I just want to get, a lot of people feel like the game hasn't started, but I love the like, when you step out, you do feel like you live your life in the vault.
And he's right. The moment you enter the wasteland, your senses are overloaded as you look out amongst the vast emptiness before you. It's unlike anything you've experienced sorry, just give me 1 sec. I'll just, speech, cool, and go. Anyway, your senses are overloaded as you look out amongst the vast emptiness before you. It's unlike anything you've experienced so far in the game. In the distance, you can... In the distance, you can see a ruined Washington monument and
I love those dear hearts and gentle.
Once you've exited the vault, the player will have a quest marker telling them to look for their dad, while being pointed towards a nearby settlement. Megaton is one of the most memorable settlements in the Fallout franchise, with its key feature being the undetonated nuclear bomb that formed the crater the town resides in. While there are those who criticise the design choice of having a town built around a bomb, saying that it's not realistic, I would argue that it shows the player very early on the drastic differences between life in the vault and life in the wasteland. The fact that the bomb crater was one of the few places where residents could both find water and securely defend it shows just how brutal the world of Fallout is. In Megaton, you meet a character named Moira Brown. She is one of Fallout 3's more memorable characters, largely due to her absent-minded approach to survival in the wasteland.
How are those hot little potatoes? Because, they're on the ground, like potatoes, and hot because they, explode. Anyway, what's up?
She sends the player on several short missions to research for her book, The Wasteland Survival Guide. Missions for Moira can range from searching for food in an abandoned supermarket to deliberately acquiring radiation poisoning. These quests can allow the player to learn more about surviving the wasteland, while Moira's constant cheerfulness is an example of Fallout's often macabre humour.
Okay, I even stitched a little smiley face in you to keep up your spirits. It's kinda hard to see from your side, though.
Megaton is also the location where you can begin one of Fallout 3's most notorious quests, Power of the Atom. When the lone wanderer first enters Megaton, they are greeted by the town sheriff, Lucas Sims. After talking to him, you learn that the bomb in the center of town is still active.
By now, most people don't give a shit. They figure if it ain't gone off by now, it never will. I respectfully disagree.
You can offer to deactivate the bomb, however you will need an explosive skill of 25 to do so. Sims recommends that you take your time.
Fine, but listen here. Just take a look at it first. Go easy.
The game wants the player to wait because they will be presented with another option. When you enter the town's tavern, you are waved over by a man in a pinstripe suit.
My. Just when I had all but given up hope. My dear boy, I'm very happy to make your acquaintance. I am Mr. Burke.
Burke wants to hire you to detonate the bomb in order to destroy the town for his employer.
I represent certain interests, and those interests view this town, this Megaton, as a blight on a burgeoning urban landscape. You have no connections here, no interest in this cesspool's affairs or fate. You could assist us in erasing this little accident off the map.
If you accept, he asks you to meet him at a place called Tenpenny Tower once you've rigged the bomb. Arriving at the tower, you meet Burke's employer, Alistair Tenpenny. Tenpenny is a sociopath. He can often be seen sniping passers-by from his tower, purely to stave off boredom. His reasoning for the destruction of Megaton is due to him disliking the aesthetics that it brings to his view.
I complained offhand one day about how I thought that heap of metal on the horizon was a bit of an eyesore. Mr. Burke offered to take care of it.
You are left to press the button, and watch as a mushroom cloud appears over the capital wasteland for the first time in 2 centuries. Many fans of the old Fallout games use this quest as an example of how the moral choices in Fallout 3 don't really force the player to have any sort of internal conflict, as it's obvious to anyone that destroying Megaton is the morally bad decision to make. This may be true, however it is a short-sighted way of looking at the quest. The quest is not about the player making some grand moral decision, it's about giving them the freedom to be a monster. The reward for destroying Megaton is substantial. 1,000 caps or 1,500 if the player passes a speech check. Plus the player is given a residence in Tenpenny Tower. These are very useful to a player this early into the game and may tip the balance for certain players in their decision making process. For others it may just be a case of wanting to watch the world burn. Very few games give players the opportunity to make such an impactful decision, especially this early in the game. The nuking of Megaton is one of the most iconic moments in gaming history, and is one of the reasons why Fallout 3 was so initially successful, due to the uniqueness of the quests at the time. However, all of this can be avoided should the player choose. They can rat Mr. Burke out to Sheriff Sims and gain a small reward for doing so. If the player also chooses to deactivate the bomb, they will be rewarded with a home in the town and be treated like a hero by its residents. Power of the Atom is one of the most unique and memorable quests in Fallout 3, and it shows the player early in the game that they will have a say in the outcome of many of its quests.
Hello, Capital Wasteland. This is Three Dog, ow, coming to you loud and proud from Galaxy News Radio.
In Megaton, you speak to the owner of the bar, Moriarty, to try and pick up the trail of your father. It is here that you learn that you and your father were not actually born in Vault 101.
Is that what your father told you? That you were born in that hole? That he was born there as well? Oh, the lies we tell to those we love. Your father brought you to the vault right after you were born. To keep you safe, you see. I remember it well, you stayed in my saloon after all.
After getting the information out of Moriarty, by either bribing, convincing, or doing a short quest for him, you learn that your father was heading to the headquarters of Galaxy News Radio in the Washington DC ruins. The DC ruins are both extremely immersive and extremely frustrating. Because of the hardware limitations at the time, the game's memory required that the area be split up into several zones, which are only connected by the difficult to navigate metro tunnels. The ruins are infested with feral ghouls and super mutants, and trying to travel through the city ruins can be difficult for players who are not well equipped. As you close in on the Galaxy News Radio building, you encounter a large group of super mutants, only to be assisted by a group of soldiers wearing power armor. You learn from the group's leader, Sarah Lyons, that they are a part of the Brotherhood of Steel, a faction that dates back to the time just after the Great War, and whose main goal is the preservation of technology and human knowledge, collecting it in order that the Brotherhood might become the catalyst of humanity's rebirth. With Lyons and the Brotherhood's help, you arrive at the GNR building. After defeating a super mutant behemoth, you are able to meet with the head of the station, a DJ named Free Dog.
I am Three Dog, jockey of discs and teller of truths, lord and master over the finest radio station to grace the wastes, Galaxy News Radio.
Free Dog will inform the rest of the wasteland of the player's actions during the story, be they good or bad. He talks about the good fight, about how he wants to inspire people to do better by each other. He's one of the few symbols of hope in the wasteland. However, Free Dog requires a favour before he tells you the location of your father.
He was here at Galaxy News. We had a great conversation. He's a real stand-up guy. If you want to know more, you're gonna have to contribute to the good fight.
You are tasked with retrieving a radar dish from the lunar lander at the National Museum of Technology, so that you can boost the station's signal. The trek through the museum is a somber one, with examples of many of humanity's greatest achievements lying in ruins, forgotten. Once you retrieve the dish, you head to the radio tower, which has been built into the Washington Monument. From the top of the monument, you can look out across the ruins of America's former capital. The National Mall has been turned into no man's land. The Capitol building is barely holding together. This view of what was once the centre of the world's greatest democracy is one that highlights the despondency of the wasteland. The sad irony of the Lincoln Memorial being occupied by slavers shows how humanity has regressed since the Great War, and is yet another illustration of the bleak world Fallout 3 is set in. Once you return to Free Dog, he tells you that your dad said he was going to Rivet City, a settlement built among the wreckage of a beached aircraft carrier. It is the largest hub in Fallout 3 and can be quite the thing to look at when it renders. This is probably the safest place in the wasteland, however the cramped hallways and metal walls don't exactly fill the player with a feeling of comfort. It is here that you can start many quests, including Stealing Independence, a quest where you retrieve the Declaration of Independence from a robotic founding father, and The Replicated Man, where you try to track down an escaped android from the Commonwealth. This quest would be a teaser for the plot of Fallout 4. In Rivet City, you meet Dr. Lee, a former colleague of your dad's, who was present at your birth. She informs you of the project they were all working on before you were born, named Project Purity, which was envisioned to create a massive water purifier that could clean out the radiation from the Potomac River, letting all residents of the Capital Wasteland have access to free, clean water. Searching the former Project Purity lab at the Jefferson Memorial, you eventually learn that your father was heading to another vault, Vault 112. Upon entering the vault, you are mistaken for an arriving resident from the vault's robotic greeters.
Welcome to Vault 112, resident. According to sensors, you have arrived 202.3 years behind schedule.
They usher you into a room full of relaxation pods. However, after entering the pod, you are transported inside some type of simulation. The simulation is of a stereotypical pre-war street called Tranquility Lane. Upon exploring, you soon meet a young girl named Betty, who seems to be a little off.
This is Tranquility Lane. We all live here, and now so do you.
It's important to note that while a handful of the vaults were in fact designed to protect Americans from the bombs, the vast majority were to be used to conduct experiments on their residents. The purpose of these tests was so that the elites of American pre-war society could test the limits of humans when put in certain situations, so that they might fare better in the post-apocalypse. Vault 112 was one of these, with its residents all being part of a simulation controlled by Vault-Tec scientist Dr. Stanislav Braun, who, disguised as Betty, has been psychologically and physically torturing the residents for over 200 years. Braun has a list of tasks for the player, which he refers to as games. Upon the completion of each, he will give the player clues as to where their father is. These games involve mentally and physically torturing the residents of Tranquility Lane, including making a little boy cry,
No, not my mommy and daddy, no.
breaking up a married couple,
What? What the hell is this?
and murdering one of the residents. Braun revels in the misery of the residents and compliments the player on finding unique ways to make them suffer.
Roller skate on the stairs? Oh my, that is simply inspired.
Braun is obsessed with being in control and will lash out at the player if they try to gain the upper hand on him in conversations. Spending the last 2 centuries in complete control of the simulation and its residents has rendered him completely sadistic.
I have no desire to leave. Here, I feel more power than I could ever hope to in the outside world. And I use that power to amuse myself. Now, for instance, you will do as I ask yet again, because I have power over you.
While he likely wasn't sane to begin with, he truly has lost his mind now. In Tranquility Lane, Bethesda are able to portray the truly horrible things humans are able to inflict on each other when they have absolute power. Once all of Braun's tasks have been completed, he allows you and your father, who has been turned into a dog, to leave. However, after speaking with one member of the simulation, you learn that there is a failsafe in the system. If activated, all the residents will be permanently killed. This failsafe can be activated at any point during the quest. This leaves the player with a moral decision to decide whether it's right to end someone's life in order to end their suffering, and if they are the ones who have the right to make that decision for them. This forces the player to decide for themselves which action is more ethical. Or at least it should have. Unfortunately, the game doesn't let you ponder on this, because when the failsafe is activated, the player is awarded positive karma, basically answering the moral question for them. This removes all inner conflict as the player is immediately told that they made the right moral decision. This is just one example of how Fallout 3 comes so close to allowing the player to doubt their decisions, to have to use their own moral compass to do what they think is best, but due to either a writing decision or a gameplay mechanic, falls just short. If the player chooses to activate the failsafe, they can leave the simulation, leaving Braun's sentence to spend an eternity alone.
Do you realize what you've done? You've triggered the failsafe, ruined everything. The subjects will die and I'll be stuck here in this hell, alone.
You ruined everything! Everything!
Upon leaving the simulation, you are finally reunited with your father.
Son, you've saved me. I was afraid I'd be trapped in there forever. It's so good to see you, but what are you doing here?
However, your story is far from over, as your goal now is to help your father activate Project Purity. To do that, you will need something called a Garden of Eden creation kit. A Garden of Eden creation kit, or GEC, is a terraforming device that will help the purifier remove radioactive particles from the water. It was also one of the key plot points from Fallout 2. However, before you search for the GEC, you go with your father to the original site of Project Purity, inside the Jefferson Memorial. You help your father and his colleagues attempt to restart the project. However, as you are helping him restore power to the project, the memorial is attacked by a group known as the Enclave. The Enclave are a group made up of the descendants of the political and economic elite from pre-war America, who believe that they alone are the rightful continuation of the United States government. While the player has heard them referenced many times before, this is the first time that they have seen them up close.
Sir, this is the last time I am going to repeat myself. Stand down at once and turn over control of this facility.
Colonel, I assure you that this facility will not function. We have never been able to successfully replicate test results.
I suggest you comply immediately, sir, in order to prevent any more incidents. Are we clear?
Yes, Colonel. Do whatever you want. There's no need for more violence.
In order to prevent the Enclave from taking the Purifier, your father sacrifices himself by flooding the main chamber with radiation.
Run. Run!
Bruh. You and a small group of survivors, including Dr. Lee, escape to the main headquarters of the Brotherhood of Steel, known as the Citadel, located in the ruins of the pre-war Pentagon. Here you reunite with Sarah Lyons, and meet her father, Elder Lyons, who was also the head of this chapter of the Brotherhood. Bethesda's use of the Brotherhood of Steel in Fallout 3 is controversial with fans of the original games. Traditionally, the Brotherhood were isolationist and rarely tried to help civilians. They were also only located on the west coast of the United States. However, I feel that Fallout 3 does enough to explain these changes. This chapter of the Brotherhood was sent on an expedition to the Capital Wasteland roughly 20 years before the start of the game. Along the way, Elder Lyons began to sympathise more and more with the people of the Wasteland, and decided that the doctrine of the Brotherhood needed to change. Lyons' decision wasn't without consequences, with several members leaving after Lyons' decision to form a splinter group known as the Brotherhood Outcasts. After speaking with Elder Lyons, you are assisted by the Brotherhood in discovering the location of a Gek, the only known one being located in the heavily irradiated Vault 87. In order to gain access to the vault, the Lone Wanderer must travel through a series of caverns known as Lamplight. However, upon arriving at the caverns, you find that it contains a town populated entirely by children.
Hold it right there, mister! Don't take another step, or we'll blow your fucking head off.
The leader, Mayor McCready, will not permit you entrance unless you rescue their friends from a group of slavers. This quest is controversial with some fans of the games, but not for the reasons you may think. There are some who criticise this quest purely on the notion that you cannot kill any of the children and force your way into the town. In the original Fallout games, it was in fact possible to kill children. This, however, was one of the worst things you could do, as it gave you the child killer trait, which would send bounty hunters after you and reduce your reputation with NPCs, just like real life. However, even at the time, this was extremely controversial, and nearly got the game banned in certain markets. You can only imagine what the response would have been in 2008. I don't think that the addition of this feature would have made the game any more immersive, nor do I think its exclusion makes the game any less immersive. Okay, now that we've gotten through the grim topic of child murder, we can now move on to the much lighter topic of child slavery. As you approach the gate to the slavers' settlement of Paradise Falls, you are stopped. In order to gain entry, you either have to pass a speech check, bribe the doorman, or bring in someone to be sold as a slave. This forces the player to decide how to proceed. If they can't afford the bribe, they will be forced to enslave one of the targets. You're faced with a similar dilemma inside Paradise Falls, as you have the option to buy the children for an extremely large sum of 2,000 caps, or you can help the kids escape by overriding their slave collars and breaking them out. Alternatively, you can try to kill all the slavers. This option is not recommended. Returning to Little Lamplight, the Lone Wanderer is allowed to enter and make their way to Vault 87. The vault is infested with super mutants, whom to this point in the story have been nothing but big dumb trolls who you have to sink an entire clip of ammunition in just to take down. This is very different to the super mutants featured in the original Fallout games. In those games, super mutants were more intelligent and had formed their own small society. Some even retained their previous level of intelligence from before they were exposed to the Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV. The FEV was an experimental virus created by the US government before the Great War in an attempt to create an army of super soldiers. Vault 87 was one of the locations where the effects of the virus were being tested, and is the reason for super mutants being present in the Capital Wasteland. The majority of super mutants in Fallout 3 aren't able to be communicated with and will attack the player on sight. However, as you continue through Vault 87, you come across Fawkes, an intelligent super mutant who has been trapped in one of the experimentation rooms.
It can't be. Either you are quite real, or I am going quite mad. Could you actually be a pure human?
In return for releasing him, Fawkes informs the player that the Gek is in an area of the vault that has been flooded with radiation. As a super mutant, or as he prefers, meta-human, Fawkes is resistant to the harmful effects of radiation. As a thank you to the player, Fawkes retrieves the Gek. After the Lone Wanderer and Fawkes retrieve the Gek, you go your separate ways. only for you to be ambushed leaving the vault.
Objective is secured, sir.
Good work, soldier. Make sure the Gek is secured aboard my vertibird.
Everything's for sale, my friend. Everything. If I had a sister, I'd sell her in a second.
You awaken in an Enclave interrogation room and come face to face with Colonel Autumn, the second in command of the Enclave and the man who was trying to force your father to hand over Project Purity earlier in the game. This confused many players, including myself, as Autumn appears to die when your father releases radiation into the Purifier's chamber. Doing some research, Autumn appears to inject himself with some unknown substance which can be assumed to have kept him alive. This is a key example of how Fallout 3's storytelling becomes increasingly convoluted as it progresses into its later stages. Autumn is trying to get the code for the water purifier out of the Lone Wanderer so that the Enclave can take control of Project Purity. Autumn wants to use the purifier to unite the wasteland under the banner of the Enclave. This could lead the player to an interesting conundrum, as they would have to choose which path they believe is best for the wasteland, the Enclave or independence. However, the game does not let you make this choice, and forces the Enclave to simply be antagonists. During Autumn's interrogation, he is interrupted by a message from the President of the Enclave, who instructs Autumn to attend to business elsewhere in the base.
Mr. President, I have no time for other matters. I'll be with you shortly.
Once Autumn has left, you are released from your captivity and invited by the President to his office. This sequence at the Enclave's headquarters of Raven Rock is one of the biggest missed opportunities in the game. There are no NPCs that the player can have a meaningful interaction with, and the player's time spent here is quite short. It would have been cool if the game had let you disguise yourself as a member of the Enclave in order to avoid detection. However, the game doesn't even let you do this.
Identity theft is not a joke, Jim!
It's really disappointing that Bethesda didn't allow the player to potentially work with the Enclave, or to even have more quests related to them. It does seem that their only purpose in Fallout 3 is to serve as the bad guys, when they could have been portrayed as a much more complex faction. This lack of depth is on full display in the Lone Wanderer's conversation with the President of the Enclave, John Henry Eden. Throughout the game, the player would have heard several Enclave radio broadcasts, which include speeches from Eden.
Hello again, America. This is John Henry Eden, your president. There are some things we should talk about, if that's all right. Let's talk about government, shall we? Or more specifically, your government, dear America. The Enclave. Just who is the Enclave? Why, now that's simple. The Enclave is you, America.
However, when the player reaches Eden's office, the game's main twist is revealed. It is revealed that John Henry Eden, the President of the Enclave, is an artificial intelligence. This reveal, while kinda interesting in theory, doesn't really make a difference to the story, and it only makes the motivations of the Enclave all the more confusing. The conversation itself with Eden is woefully shallow. While Autumn wants to use the Purifier to unite the wasteland under the Enclave, Eden is looking to use a modified version of the FEV virus to kill all mutated life in the wasteland. This includes super mutants, ghouls, and the majority of humans.
The good people of this country cannot regain control while mutation runs rampant through our land. My soldiers cannot stem the tide, nor can the cult you've come into contact with, this Brotherhood of Steel. Mutations like these super mutants and ghouls must be purged from our society, our world, before we can proceed anew.
His reasoning for this is that it would pave the way for the Enclave to rebuild society. This is actually very similar to the goals of the Enclave in Fallout 2. In fact, it's so similar that it's exactly the same. The most laughable yet disappointing aspect of the Lone Wanderer's interaction with Eden is one of its conclusions. With a succession of speech checks, the player can convince Eden, the leader of the Enclave, to destroy himself and Raven Rock.
Yes, I suppose it is. Very well. You shall have your wish. Once you've left, I'll put an end to the Enclave.
This completely sums up Bethesda's portrayal of the Enclave in Fallout 3. It's easily the worst aspect of the game's story. After escaping Raven Rock, you are reunited with Forks outside the base. Forks can now accompany you for the rest of the game. He's easily the best companion in Fallout 3, partially due to his unique view of the world, but mostly due to the Gatling laser he carries around. Returning to the Citadel, you inform Elder Lyons that the Enclave is now in possession of the Gek. You and Sarah's Brotherhood squad must assault the Jefferson Memorial before they can activate it. The Brotherhood also unleashes Liberty Prime, a giant pre-war robot originally built to fight communist Chinese forces in Alaska.
Democracy is truth. Communism is death.
The following sequence is controversial with fans, as what should be the final battle of the game involves the player following Liberty Prime to the Purifier. It is a pretty epic moment as you watch Liberty Prime tear through the Enclave forces with lasers and miniature nuclear bombs, all while blaring anti-communist propaganda.
We will not fear the Red Menace.
However, these sort of cinematic scenes that involve little to no input from the player don't really have a place in a role-playing game like Fallout 3. Entering the Purifier, you once again come face to face with Colonel Autumn.
You again? I can't say I'm surprised. You and your ilk seem hell-bent on destroying everything our government has worked to achieve. There's nothing to stop me from killing you this time. Let's end this.
Here, you can choose to gain revenge for your father. Or you can choose the peaceful road, convincing Autumn to surrender.
And you? You would just let me leave? How can I be sure you won't just shoot me once I turn my back on you? I suppose it doesn't matter much now. Very well. I shall leave you to your fate.
While not as laughable as the conversation with President Eden, it's still extremely underwhelming as the final confrontation of the game, regardless of which path you choose to take. Now all that is left is to activate the Purifier, but there's a problem.
Remotely, and we have a serious problem. The facility has been damaged during the fighting. Some of it looks accidental, some of it may have been sabotage. There's pressure building up in holding tanks. It needs to be released now, or else the whole facility could explode. To release the pressure, you're going to have to turn the Purifier on. Do you understand me? It has to be turned on now. If I'm reading this right, I'm afraid there are lethal levels of radiation inside the chamber. I'm sorry. I wish there was some other way, but there's just no time. It has to be done now, or the damage will be catastrophic.
The player can choose who should go into the chamber and activate the Purifier. If they take the gentleman's approach and send Sarah into the Purifier, she'll be about as pleased as you would expect.
Good luck? That's it? Fine, thanks. Now, let's get this over with.
The game will end and Ron Perlman will criticise the lone wanderer for not having the courage of their father.
But the child refused to follow the father's selfless example, instead allowing a true hero to venture into the irradiated control chamber of Project Purity and sacrifice her own life for the greater good of mankind.
The canonical ending of the game is the player sacrificing themselves for the good of the wasteland, or the detriment. If you still have the modified FEV vial, you can still fulfill Eden's wishes by inserting it into the Purifier and condemning the wasteland to death. However, if you do not choose this path, you activate the Purifier, typing in the code inspired by your mother's favourite Bible passage, Revelation 21:6. As you slowly succumb to the radiation, the life fades from you. However, you know that your parents' life work has been completed. This would be an incredibly impactful ending in a film, book, or almost any other type of video game, but not in a role-playing game. I think this is one of the key issues with Fallout 3. Many of the writing decisions made by Bethesda don't suit the medium they are using. Many of the big cinematic moments, like the assault on the Jefferson Memorial, aren't as impactful as they should be because the player feels completely irrelevant to the action. Something that should never occur in this sort of game. It goes without saying that Fallout 3's ending was controversial with many players, and it wasn't long before Bethesda had to admit that they had made a mistake.
We have a location isn't going to help at all. We have a
mean comatose. After all this, to be left in a state like that?
All of this just works.
By killing the player character, Bethesda had prevented players from continuing the game after the completion of the main quest line. This meant that any uncompleted side quests or DLCs could not be completed after attacking the Jefferson Memorial. This is a mortal sin for an RPG.
Stop! You violated the law!
Many players were understandably pissed with this ending, and Bethesda obviously realised their mistake and quickly made moves to rectify it. Just, not for free. The third DLC released for Fallout 3 was called Broken Steel. Among other things, the DLC acted as an epilogue for the main questline by having the Lone Wanderer wake up weeks later in the Citadel after being rescued by the Brotherhood of Steel. The DLC also added some other minor features and increased the level cap from 20 to 30. Bethesda had originally written themselves into a hole in relation to player companions. In the original release of Fallout 3, if the player had tried to command Forks or any other radiation-resistant companion to activate the Purifier, they would refuse. This obviously upset many fans and led to criticism for Bethesda as it showed a lack of forethought on their part. Broken Steel would give the player the option to pick this path. However, it's an extremely underwhelming ending. Ron Perlman's attitude doesn't help either.
But the child refused to follow the father's selfless example. Instead, allowing a true hero to venture into the irradiated control chamber of Project Purity.
What the hell, Ron? While Broken Steel does add much needed adjustments to the game, it does take a lot of the meaning out of the main quest's ending, with the player's sacrifice meaning little as they never really had to sacrifice anything. Fallout 3 is a complex game, in many ways. It's strange for such a story-rich game to be lacking in depth in so many areas. Seems that for every moment where you truly lose yourself in the world Bethesda has created, there's another that leaves you scratching your head, wondering what the hell they were thinking. Fallout 3 is still, in my opinion, a brilliant game, both for how immersive its world can be and the amount of freedom it allowed its players to have. There's no doubt that it was one of the Xbox 360's and PlayStation 3's best releases, and should be remembered as the game that brought the Fallout franchise back from the dead and introduced it to millions of new fans from around the world. However, the game's many flaws from a writing and technical standpoint will forever make Fallout 3 a game that is perfectly imperfect.